Society of India. Our speaker for this webinar is Professor Suparna Ghosh-Cheerath. I welcome you, ma'am. I also welcome our principal, Dr. Sadhna Sharma, ma'am, who is our motivating force and our pillar of strength. She is traveling to some place for a meeting, but still she said, okay, I will come and join you. So that is great on your part, ma'am. You always encourage us. I also welcome Dr. Pulkit Mathur, convener, NSI Daily Chapter, and other esteemed members from NSI executive team. I welcome distinguished faculty members, research scholars, and students from various universities of India. Thank you so much. And undernutrition in children occurs when children do not consume enough calories, proteins, or micronutrients to maintain good health. It results both in short-term and long-term irreversible adverse health outcomes. This problem of malnutrition occurs more in tribal children due to various reasons. We are here to find solutions. Today's webinar is a step in this direction. Now I request Principal Ma'am, Dr. Sadhna Sharma Ma'am, to say a few words. Over to you, Principal Ma'am. Ma'am, are you connected? Yes. Dr. Sadhna ma'am, can you hear me?
You're muted, Dr. Sadhna.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Now we can hear you. Yes, ma'am.
मेरी आवाज आ रही है? आपकी नहीं आ रही है?
मेरी नहीं अब आ रही है. मेरी नहीं आ रही. अब आपकी अब हम आपको सुन पा रहे हैं, मैम. Ma'am, I've just introduced that this webinar has started. I welcome the speaker, and now it's over to you, ma'am. Sadhna ma'am, can you welcome our speaker and say a few words? It seems ma'am को मेरी आवाज नहीं जा रही है. Am I audible to others?
Yes, you are, Dr. Meenu.
So, but somehow she. So, in the meanwhile, maybe I will ask Dr. Pulkit to say a few words, and maybe if ma'am joins again, she will speak. So, over to you, Dr. Pulkit.
Thank you, Dr. Meenu. I'm extremely grateful to Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College for collaborating with Nutrition Society of India, Delhi chapter, in convening this event today, and indeed for all the National Nutrition Month celebrations. Thank you so much, Dr. Sadhna Sharma ji and Ms. Mamta Marwaha and Dr. Meenu Agarwal for collaborating with us. I just wanted to tell our guests a little about Nutrition Society of India. We are a body of nutrition professionals from India and abroad. So we have members who are not residing in India as well. And as a society, we work a lot towards disseminating, scientific findings in the area of nutrition and allied sciences as well. And this we do through regular annual meetings and symposias and seminars and workshops. So we do try to motivate a lot young nutritionists to take up research in nutrition science. And we have about 36 zonal chapters and more than 5,000 members. And besides that, besides meetings for regular members and for students, we are also involved in a lot of outreach activities in which we involve members of the community, whether they are field level functionaries or they are farmers or school children. So this is something that we do, and we are also a part of NetProfan, which is a network of professionals of 7 different associations. So thank you once again, and we are indeed very grateful to you, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College, its faculty and students, for co-hosting this event with us. Thank you again once more.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Pulkit. You are always our inspiration and you support us in whatever we do at Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College. Thank you so much. And to the participants, before we move over, I would like to say a few points. Number one, please keep your audios on mute and videos also switched off mode during the talk. Number two, pin the screen of resource person when the session begins. Please write your questions or queries in the chat box. Fill up the feedback form at the end of the webinar. This is prerequisite for the participation certificate. Participants are requested to use the same email ID for filling the feedback form as used at time of registration for the webinar. These are some of the few points which are important. And now I will just try again once more if our principal can join us for a minute. Ma'am, am I audible to you, Dr. Sadhana Sharma, ma'am?
Yes, yes. Now you are.
Yes, please, few words from you will be a great blessing for us.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, welcome everyone, and especially Professor Suparna Ghosh, a qualified nutrition, and that this topic is very important and very good. Also, I congratulate the organizers, Dr. Marwa and Professor role of indigenous food and Poshan Vatika in addressing infant children. It's really very good to see them. As we know that indigenous are naturally existing in specific locations and consumed as part of dietary habit of the people living in that part. We talk about tribal people. Since independence, multiple government policies and programs sought to develop tribal communities by focusing on their livelihood, education, and despite this attempt of special treatment, tribal people continue to be the most undeveloped, undernourished segment of the Indian society. Today we are going to listen Professor Suparna Ghosh, who is having long experience to study the nutrition status and dietary practices. Hello.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You are audible.
You can listen me.
Yes, ma'am.
So, who is having a long experience to study the nutrition status and dietary practices of vulnerable communities. I will stop myself here only, and I congratulate you again, and then I wish you all the best for the success of this webinar, as we will learn so many things after listening the speech of Professor Suparna Ghosh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sadhana, ma'am. We are really privileged and obliged that you could spare your time despite you are traveling. So thank you so much. And also, I would like to not start the session, but before that, I forgot that I would like to welcome our participants who are from all parts of India. They are from Pondicherry University, Anna University, Bundelkhand University, Punjabi University, from institutes of Chennai, Karnataka, Jodhpur, and of course from different colleges of Delhi University. So I'm really overwhelmed, and thank you so much all the participants for the faith you have shown. And now I will give the mic to Mamta ma'am to please introduce Suparna Ghosh, ma'am. Over to you, Mamta ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Meenu, and thank you so much, Dr. Sadhana, for gracing our webinar. Before I begin on Dr. Suparna Ghosh, I would also like to thank Dr. Pulkit for this beautiful collaboration between food technology and nutrition. That's our parent body. So welcome and thanks to you. And now it really gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Suparna Ghosh Jairath, our speaker here today. Dr. Ghosh Jairath holds a master's and PhD in Foods and Nutrition from Delhi University. She is a qualified, accredited practicing dietitian and an accredited nutritionist in Australia and has 25 years of experience as a clinical, academic, and research nutritionist. Currently, she is working at the Indian Institute of Public Health as a faculty and as the head community nutrition. She is an intermediate fellow with the Wellcome Trust DBT India Alliance and is leading the research work titled Dietary Diversity and Nutritive Value of Indigenous Foods in Addressing Food Security and Nutritional Status of Vulnerable Tribal Communities of India. She has worked as a consultant, Health, Nutrition and Family Welfare Division in the Planning Commission of India, the National Coordinator for a World Bank assisted capacity building project on food and drug safety under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. She's a faculty with the Lady Irwin, she's been a faculty with the Lady Irwin College, Delhi University in the Department of Foods and Nutrition, a research dietitian in a clinical trial on phenylketonuria at the Children's Hospital at Westmead, Australia, and a research assistant at the Sick Kids Hospital in Toronto, Canada. She started her career as a clinical nutritionist at the Indraprastha Apollo Hospital, New Delhi, as a senior dietitian. At the Indian Institute of Public Health, she is involved in teaching public health nutrition, conducting trainings and short-term workshops, and conducting research in the core areas of maternal and child health nutrition. She is the faculty coordinator of the Masters of Public Health program and the lead faculty for a short-term training workshop on capacity building of program functionaries in managing severe and acute malnutrition in under 5 years old children. She is passionate about exploring local and cost-effective solutions to address maternal and child undernutrition in India. She leads research work in understanding the food environment of vulnerable communities. One of her research explores an important nexus between agrobiodiversity, hidden hunger, and rural indigenous communities. In this research, she is engaged with indigenous tribal communities of Jharkhand to understand their traditional ecological knowledge, agroforestry biodiversity around them, and their nutritional status. She is further synthesizing and scientifically validating these findings to inform policy that address malnutrition in the country. Her other research interests include studying food and nutrition policies for prevention of chronic diseases in India and health systems research. She has published several papers in peer-reviewed journals. Over to you, Dr. Suparna Ghosh-Jairath. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Mamta ma'am. Should I start sharing my screen and then I can?
Yes, ma'am.
Please
Yeah,
do that.
just let me know if you can see my screen. Yeah. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Mamta ma'am, for the warm introduction. I can't hold myself back without acknowledging that Mamta ma'am has taught me when I was in my second year of BSc Nutrition in Lady Irwin College. And I'm a little overwhelmed to see Dr. Sushma Sharma there in the platform listening to me. So I feel a bit nervous presenting in front of my teachers, but yes, it's a pleasure. First of all, to be in this gathering where I have my teachers present, my colleagues present, Pulkit, Bani and I'm batchmates. So yeah, it's a little overwhelming, but please pardon my excitement. But yeah, so I'll start. Firstly, good evening to all the participants. And firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Meenu Agarwal, Mamta ma'am at Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College and other colleagues for giving me this opportunity to interact with a group of budding nutritionists as well as experts in the field of nutrition, who, according to me, have a very crucial role to play in addressing nutrition issues in the country. We can contribute immensely towards the overall development of our nation, provided we as a fraternity recognize the multi-sectorality of nutrition problems and promote nutrition literacy amongst the key stakeholders. So on the occasion of Rashtriya Poshan Ma, I would like to interact with all of you on the role of indigenous foods and Poshan Vatika in addressing malnutrition in tribal children. Has my slide moved? Can you see the next slide?
Yes, ma'am. It is moved.
Perfect. So just to give you an outline, I'm going to talk about the tribal nutrition scenario in the country, where I'm going to refer to some of the national level data. Then I will be focusing my talk on indigenous food systems of India and some significant study findings from the Indigenous Food Project, which Dr. Marwa has already told you, the area where I'm working right now for my fellowship. Then I will be sharing case studies of Nutri-Garden interventions from across the globe and what we have actually done in India, some of the state-specific examples, and then finally the government initiatives related to Nutri-Gardens in different states of India. To start with, we all know, and as Dr. Sharma has also pointed out, that the population, the scheduled tribe population in India is huge. We have around 104 million tribal communities in India who comprise of 8.6% of the total national population. Article 342 of Indian Constitution identifies the Indian tribes as scheduled tribes who are characterized by primordial traits, geographic isolation, distinct culture, a sense of shyness to interact with the outside world, several of those communities, not all, and a social and economic backwardness. Currently, there are 705 tribal communities recognized, and out of which 75 belong to particularly vulnerable tribal groups, PVTGs. Now, if you ask me who are these PVTGs, well, these PVTGs have specifically pre-agricultural level of technology, low levels of literacy, economic backwardness, and a declining or a stagnant population that identifies them or distinguishes them from the rest of the scheduled tribe community. And these PVTGs actually require much more focused attention. Programs are directed towards them, and nutritionally also they are quite vulnerable. The highest tribal population in India are, of course, concentrated in some of the northeastern states like Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Sikkim, Tripura, and in states like Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. The primary occupation of this population is shifting cultivation, hunting, gathering. These are the primordial traits. They are still carrying forward. They are pastoralists and artisans. The communities are characterized with extreme poverty, high illiteracy, poor hygiene and sanitation practices, frequent episodes of food scarcity. And by food scarcity, I mean to say that a major part of this population have now resorted to settled agriculture, but most of them are smallholder farmers, and they practice sustenance farming, and most of their agriculture is rain-fed. So they have periodic food scarcity, which is a very common phenomena in several of these tribal groups. And they, because of their geographic isolation, they have limited access to health services. The poor nutritional status, the nutritional outcomes across women and children in these communities is a common feature amongst most of the tribal communities. Now, if we look at the nutrition among tribal children, because this talk is focused more on tribal children, if we see the NFHS 4 data, now that we have NFHS 5 also for some of the states, and which is also not giving us a very bright picture, as several states are lagging behind in several of the child nutrition indicators. But if we specifically look at nutritional status of under 5 children in tribal communities, if you look at the percentages on your screen, stunting 43%, wasting 27%, underweight 45%, anemia 63%, and under 5 mortality 27%, these figures are higher than the general population average of the country. If we look at the feeding practices on your left-hand side of the screen, if you see exclusive breastfeeding is, the figure is good, but a word of caution, if we look at exclusive breastfeeding, it's nice, but prolonged breastfeeding is perhaps a major problem amongst these communities. And I'm going to share some of the figures from my own study. Timely initiation of breastfeeding is still there around 45%. But if you look at the quality of the complementary feeding that is being given, only 15.8% actually are consuming 4 or more food groups, and only about 10% receive food which are rich in iron. Looking at the biomarkers, some biochemical parameters, folate deficiency, zinc deficiency, B12 deficiency, and vitamin A deficiency, all these have been reported in the Comprehensive National Nutrition Survey. Now we move on to the food systems of several of these communities, and we collectively call the tribal food systems as indigenous food systems because they are considered as indigenous communities in our country, and that is true for globally as well. Now, tribal populations reside in close proximity to the dense hills and forests. They interact with the biodiverse agroforestry for sustenance and livelihood. So we must understand why we are calling them as the torch bearers of indigenous food systems, because they are still living in their natural habitats and are still interacting with the environment in a very sustainable manner, which makes the knowledge of this community valuable to us. They control a wealth of knowledge of their unique natural ecosystems, as I just mentioned, including their native foods, which are referred to as indigenous foods, and the entire system, including the food supply chain, the food environment, the consumer behavior, and everything put together is called the indigenous food system. The indigenous food systems have survived for hundreds and thousands of years and have potential. They have the potential to provide sustainable solutions to the nutrition crisis among tribal and indigenous populations. So that is where the paradox lies, and that made us work on the indigenous food project that we are already conducting in understanding the disconnect between what translates the availability into actual intake and better nutritional status in these communities. The indigenous foods have the potential to mitigate micronutrient deficiencies as well as risk of chronic diseases. Now, you must understand that we are talking about triple burden of malnutrition, and triple burden of malnutrition looks at undernutrition, overnutrition, and micronutrient deficiencies. But if we think about the foods that we are talking about, the indigenous foods, the plant species, the fungi species, the animals, all these put together are not only good sources of macronutrients, but are also unique sources of multiple micronutrients that are present in them. So that makes the strategy more important because it tries to address the triple burden of malnutrition utilizing the same set of foods. So yes, indigenous foods can thus mitigate micronutrient deficiencies and the risk of chronic diseases, provide food security in times of distress, for example, during extreme climatic events. And during the COVID times also, we actually went ahead and interacted with these communities and found that they have unique characteristics which offer them resilience during the time of COVID, owing to their shorter food supply chain. That is, their farm to fork is much shorter as compared to we urban people, because for us farm is very far off. There are several intermediate steps, but for them they already have access to diverse food sources. So because of the shorter farm to fork length or the food supply chain and the food environment which has diversity, they had some kind of resilience, yet the practices and all need to be reinforced. They need to be educated about their own resources, and they have to value their food systems to actually draw maximum benefits out of their own food systems. So the study rationale for the indigenous food study was that we could see a rich biodiversity in the tribal regions in the country. So the states which are having high proportion of tribal population also have a higher forest cover, a diverse, and some of them are actually biodiverse. In fact, in the northeastern region, some of them are considered as biodiversity hotspots. So we need to revive and revitalize the biodiversity of those areas and try to establish and reintroduce a biodiverse food source to these communities to make these biodiverse hotspots really functional and respond towards the high levels of malnutrition in these communities. So my research question was trying to answer what makes this rich biodiversity translate into better nutrition among women and children? And what are the various factors, the barriers, the facilitators towards translation of a rich biodiverse food source, their conservation and sustainable way of utilization towards addressing malnutrition in women and children? So we initiated the Indigenous food study almost a decade back. And the research questions that we were trying to answer were, are Indigenous food systems sustainable? Can the Indigenous food systems be a sustainable solution to address malnutrition? Is there a way of systematic documentation of these rich food sources? Because we all know that there is a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom out there, but has it been systematically documented? Because there is a chance that with every passing generation, the knowledge is getting diminished. The knowledge about edibility of several species of plants, animals, fungi, and others. So there is a need to systematically document these resources, and FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, has already initiated an effort where they have identified 8 or 9 geographical regions across the globe, and they are doing a systematic documentation in which Meghalaya is one of the areas where from South Asian, amongst the South Asian countries where this systematic documentation is happening. The next question was, can we associate Indigenous food intake to nutritional status? So we wanted to look at the biomarkers. What happens to the biomarkers of these people who are still continuing to consume their indigenous foods, or what happens to their other nutritional indicators or outcomes like anthropometric outcomes and others? And what are the factors that affect indigenous food consumption? So we wanted to look at the barriers and facilitators of indigenous food consumption. And lastly, can we develop feasible recommendations for promoting indigenous food systems with sound scientific evidence? So we can't go anecdotal, like, you know, you should eat these foods, this is good, this has high micronutrient sources. But what makes people eat and consume those foods? What makes people value those foods? What are the facilitators in encouraging the consumption of indigenous foods and developing recommendations that can inform policies related to dietary diversity was something that we were looking at. So we use this particular food systems research framework where several of the drivers, as you can see on the top of your screen, the biophysical, infrastructural, political, socio-cultural, demographic drivers, all these actually feed into the food supply chain. Food supply chain here means what goes into the production, processing, storage, distribution, and also marketing, for that matter, of different kinds of foodstuffs that come under these food systems. Then this feeds into the food environment. Now, an important thing is the typology of the food environment that we sort of developed while working with this population as well as population across the globe. And our collaborators, Dr. Shauna Dons and team, they actually looked at our food environment, and we could do a typology where we divided the food environment into built food environment versus natural food environment. In the natural food environment, we had wild and cultivated food sources. And this is a very critical thing or crucial thing for the indigenous tribal groups. And then we have the built food environment or the market food environment, under which we have the formal food environment like our public distribution system, and if there are formal markets, and informal food environment, that is the markets which are accessed by these tribal communities. Now all these, the food supply feeds into the food environment, which along with consumer preference and other factors like availability, diversity, desirability, satiety, giving enough value to these foods, the desirability part of it leads to food consumption. Then we look at the nutritive value of several of these food items which are not well documented. So we do a food composition analysis, and then based on that, we look at the nutritional intake and the nutritional outcomes in the population, which then would result in better maternal and child health nutritional status. So the methodology we adopted, it was an exploratory cross-sectional study with a longitudinal component because we wanted to capture the seasonal availability of various indigenous foods in these food systems. The study locale were some of the districts in Jharkhand where there is a high population density of the tribal groups that we studied. And we studied 4 tribal groups, including 3 most populous tribal groups, Santhal, Ho, and Munda. And the 4th one is a particularly vulnerable tribal group, which is the Saurya Paharias. We used mixed methods wherein we used qualitative inquiries, village transects, observation checklists, focus group discussions, in-depth interviews, along with quantitative surveys in terms of doing the dietary intake assessment, the household surveys looking at the socio-demographic profile of the community, and of course, all of you know about the ABCDs of nutritional status assessment. So except for clinical signs and symptoms, we looked at the anthropometric and the biochemical parameters. We also did nutrient analysis of several foods, and for that we had to collaborate with ethnobotanists to first identify these foods through their scientific names. So we developed herbariums, shared it with the botanists, and after getting the scientific names, we looked for their nutritive value in the Indian food composition databases. If that was not available, then we went ahead and did the nutrient analysis in the NABL certified lab, and we could find several foods which had good amount of several micronutrients, and this was really expected. So I will be sharing some findings on the Saurya Paharia and the Munda tribal groups, especially amongst the children. So what we found? Well, we found that food was accessed from several food sources. So we calculated the food access diversity index, which is based on all the natural food environment these people were accessing. And these included their fields, their backyards, the forests, the water bodies, and even the open spaces where several weeds just grow, and they know the edibility of those weeds and incorporate them in their diets. And of course, they had access to market, both formal markets, that is the PDS, and also the programs like the midday meal program and the supplementary nutrition given through the Anganwadi, as well as the public distribution system. So as I said, they were accessing diverse food sources, and as you can see on your screen, more than 90% of the community had access to cultivated crops. They were practicing sustenance farming. Then around 60 to 80% of the community owned their own livestock, and most of these were utilized for consumption at the household level. 94% to 80%, 80% to 94% of them had access to local forests, and around 83% of them were using water bodies to access their day-to-day food requirements. Around 190 varieties of indigenous foods, apart from non-indigenous varieties, were identified in these 2 tribal communities. And this is the screen that I'm sharing right now with you is a free listing exercise that we did with the Munda tribal community, where we identified 194 indigenous food sources. And when we further explored, we found that around more than 50% of them currently are little used or historically consumed. So they had knowledge about several of these foods, but we're actually consuming around 87 of them. We went ahead and did taxonomic classification. We were successful in doing so, and we could identify a good number of these foods which were habitually consumed as well as which were historically consumed. The nutritive value were also available, and some of them were assessed as part of this present study. And what we found, the last box that you can see on your screen, that around 36 of the foods that were identified under the habitually consumed indigenous foods were rich sources of micronutrients, and several of those which were used to, which were and habitual in which used to be consumed historically, but now they are little used, were also rich sources of micronutrients. However, despite the presence of so many of the indigenous food varieties and consumption of at least 50% of them, we could see poor nutritional outcomes amongst the children. So if we look at the Saurya Paharia children, we calculated their minimum diet diversity score, and we found 2. That is, only 2 varieties of food groups were consumed routinely during the past 2 days of dietary intake. Only 6.5% of the children consumed 4 and more types of food groups, and only 8% consumed, like 8% of the older children. So it's not that only the younger children are vulnerable. You look at the older children, they were also consuming, just 8% of them were actually consuming 4 or more food groups. However, higher dietary diversity, so those who had scores better than 2, was significantly associated with higher intake of most of the nutrients. And we could clearly see a strong relation between consumption, dietary diversity, and consumption of micronutrients. Only 40% of the children reported indigenous food consumption during the previous day. And those who consumed had higher consumption of calcium and vitamin A. Now, the data is still, I would say it cannot be extrapolated much, because we did not adjust this with other factors like the educational status of the mother and other socio-demographic factors, accessibility to the forest and all, which is under process, and we will be able to give you much more richer data once we do that. Also, the intakes that have been considered here are actual intakes, but in reality, we go ahead and do the usual intake by doing some kind of statistical treatment to the dietary intake data of these children. And the usual intake gives us a better representation of the habitual intake of these children. We found weak correlation between indigenous food consumption and dietary diversity, which was evident because they were not consuming a diverse diet, and whatever little bit of indigenous food they consumed, these foods being rich in certain micronutrients were contributing to those micronutrients in their diets. So if you look at the nutrient intake across different categories of diet diversity scores, so those children in the younger age group on your left-hand side, if you see those who had better dietary diversity had better intake of energy, even macronutrients for that matter, energy, B vitamins, folate, vitamin C. Vitamin C was not actually better in those who were consuming a diverse diet, and so is true for the other micronutrients. But for the older children, the intake was much better amongst those who were having a diverse diet, because the amount also matters, how much of the food these children were actually consuming on the previous day. Especially of the indigenous or of the different varieties of food. And if you look at the nutrient intake between indigenous food consumer versus non-consumer, as highlighted, the younger children, we could find that the vitamin A intake was better amongst the consumers, and amongst the older children, we found riboflavin, vitamin B6, folate, and vitamin A intake was better in those children who were consumers of indigenous foods. Now, if we look at the IYCF practices, early initiation of breastfeeding was 65%, pre-lacteal feeds 20%, colostrum, good number. With exclusive breastfeeding, you see 25.9%. But I'll take you to the next slide, and which shows extended breastfeeding. And here we see around 80% of the children were exclusively breastfed till 6 years and beyond. And this was around 53% of them were only on breastfeed from 7 months to beyond 1 year. So the introduction of complementary feeding was somewhat problematic in this particular community. Now, if you look at the nature of complementary feeding, minimal meal frequency was reported only in 4 children, minimum diet diversity in 1, animal food consumption. Now, we feel that it's tribal community. Non-vegetarianism was not an exception. It was a common thing, but perhaps children were not consuming these foods. In fact, several of these children were consuming biscuits and bread as their complementary food as compared to the natural food sources. Some of them were definitely consuming fruits and vegetables, but if we look at the other indigenous food sources that existed in this population, perhaps several of them were not offered in sufficient amount to these children. high prevalence of undernutrition in terms of anthropometric indicators like wasting, stunting, and underweight was seen. And if you can see the PVTGs, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups, the Soria Paharia children had poorer nutritional status as compared to the Munda tribal group. And these tribal groups in Soria Paharia, they are residing in the upper hilly region with the geographical isolation and the other typical features which we see in the tribal communities, especially in the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So you see the level of underweight is 45%, stunting 41%, and wasting at 28.7%. All are higher than the national average and even the state average. But in case of Mundas, they were a little better off than the Soria Paharias, but they were bad in terms of the national average. So what we did, we went ahead and interacted with these communities, especially the mothers. After these results had come, it was not only a research project, but we had to understand the ways of, incorporating these indigenous foods into their routine diet, what kind of educational message we should give, or at what level we should interact with the community to understand their problem from their own lens and develop an answer. So kind of a participatory learning action exercise could be undertaken, wherein we understand where the problem is and let the community decide how they can how they can address their own issues. So when we interacted with them, we found that we wanted to create awareness about exclusive breastfeeding, which I don't think was an issue at that point of time, because they were well aware of their exclusive breastfeeding practices, but complementary feeding was an issue. And they were not aware of the ideal amounts, frequency, consistency of complementary food that needs to be offered to these children, the importance of balanced diet, and we wanted to explore the examples of indigenous recipes which can be given to these children utilizing the local foods. And to our surprise, we could see that the mothers were knowledgeable about several recipes, but they were not able to connect their knowledge with actual practices with their children. So a kind of a bridging of this knowledge versus actual practice was what was something that was desirable, and maybe interventions that would actually address the availability of lots and lots of indigenous foods which are out there in the forest, but perhaps several of them can be transplanted in the backyard and grown, because the community had a lot of appreciation for the taste, palatability, and other properties of several of these indigenous foods. So the next step was to create evidence-based interventions. So based on the sessions, we actually found that the community was aware of several traditional recipes using local indigenous foods. However, low utilization of indigenous food or poor access, because, opportunity cost was something which was there, which was uniform amongst all the tribal groups. So these foods are available in the forest, but women, because of migration, there are no men in the household, and the women have to go and fetch several of these foods. But child caring is also required. Then looking after their farms is also required in the absence of a male member in the family. So somewhere the access was affected, and as a result of which there was low utilization of indigenous foods, which was again due to lack of nutritional knowledge, opportunity cost of accessing forest foods, poor utilization of kitchen gardens due to low farm output, lack of technical knowledge, and water scarcity. This was a very common feature in the particularly vulnerable tribal group, because these places are totally rain-fed and they are dependent on the rains, and backyard garden cannot thrive if they do not have enough of water resources available. So those villages which were closer to the rivers and had water sources were better off with their kitchen gardens versus those which were up in the hills and they did not have even the deep bore or wells, and the water supply was very erratic. Like several of the villages did not have any constructed water supply available to them. Exposure to energy dense market food and food security schemes were also found to be a barrier towards utilizing the local foods in the community. So for them, market food was a high value food, and the monotonous diet which is distributed through the public distribution system was something which we found was a deterrent towards use of indigenous varieties. So for them, rice was easy access. So several of them were consuming more of rice as compared to the millets which they used to grow in the past. So in our opinion, establishment of nutri gardens and dietary incorporation of nutritious indigenous foods could be one of the micro solutions to reducing malnutrition in these communities. But establishment of nutri gardens would definitely require proper knowledge about the technology, availability of water resources in order to create an enabling environment for these communities to go ahead and utilize the backyard garden, which is present in all the households, almost all the households, effectively for production of indigenous foods. Now I will take you to the examples. So we have done the study till this level, and we have understood that there is a potential of promoting nutrition gardens in these communities. And we have agriculture extension centers available at the district level, the Krishi Vigyan Kendras, with whom we can partner and help the community or work with the community and co-produce this kind of an intervention where nutri gardens can be utilized. So what are nutri gardens in Poshan Vatikas? Nutri gardens or Poshan Vatika is the growing of nutrient-rich crops in household backyard or in the vicinity to meet requirements of the family all the year round. In addition to the family's food, home gardens also augment household income, especially for women, because they can sell the surplus produced in their own gardens. It ensures an inexpensive, regular, handy supply of fresh foods, mainly vegetables, which are basic to nutrition, especially to improve the dietary diversity and micronutrient consumption. Nutri gardens are a sustainable solution to malnutrition. Tribal communities already have easy access to natural resources like land and water, but they lack the knowledge about the nutritional importance of the available and easily cultivable indigenous foods. Hence, nutri gardens may be regarded as a sustainable solution to bridge the gap between the available resources and its utilization, address undernutrition as well as micronutrient deficiencies, and perhaps also address macronutrient or overnutrition, because these vegetables and fruits that they grow are rich in phytochemicals as well as micronutrients. And we all know that a good serve of fresh fruits and vegetables are also protective against several chronic degenerative diseases. Create additional revenue generation opportunities for the farmer communities. Now, I will share a few case studies. First, some of the case studies globally and the learnings from them, followed by some of the case studies from India. So the first one is from Philippines, where they, what they did, they created school garden enhancement using bio-intensive gardening methods, supplementary feeding in the schools where using the nutritious indigenous vegetables from the garden, and nutrition education was given to school children and their parents. The impact was better availability of diverse foods, better availability of indigenous food items, and this particular project was implemented in 27. So these are small scale projects, but give us a fair idea about how these can be part of the larger interventions. Then this is a study from Brazil where they have focused a lot on the moringa, that is the drumstick leaves. So in India, we would resort to moringa. But there are other communities who say that we love the taste of moringa. So, you know, there is no one size fits all. So accordingly, the intervention has to be managed. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, because I just read a note that my internet connectivity is a little unstable. All right. So yeah, so if you look at this particular school garden program in Brazil, school curriculum on topics such as recycling, sustainability, and food security were given. So, you know, you have to create a knowledge base if you want to promote an intervention like this. And then Children were given moringa seeds to be planted, and then nutrition education. So supportive nutrition education is an important component of this Nutri-Garden intervention. As you can see, there was increased environmental awareness, better consumption of moringa, and better attendance and class performance of the school students. Then another study from Mali, again creating vegetable gardens for the family consumption, promotion of healthy eating habits, childcare practices, and cooking demonstrations. So see, it is not only the Nutri-Garden, but a lot of nutrition education component. And here I strongly advocate the behavior change component, which needs to accompany all these specific interventions. Again, the impact, better nutritional projects, better nutritional practices, and a huge improvement in vegetable production at the household level. Another study from Sri Lanka, where they established and diversified home gardens for increased dietary diversity, and awareness generation programs, provision of technical support. So we can learn from these programs and we can adopt it to specific scenario amongst the tribal communities in India to promote kitchen gardens and Nutri-Gardens. Impact, high crop diversity, increased self-employment, and significant improvement in dietary diversity. Then we come to the examples from India, and here this project was implemented in 10 villages in Melghat district of Maharashtra, where what they did different plant seeds, perennial fruit trees, vegetables, and GLBs were distributed to the household along with regular IEC sessions to emphasize on nutrition and related components. And what was the impact? All households practice kitchen gardening throughout the year. So some of the communities are utilizing the kitchen garden for a specific period of time, but with better water availability. And in this case, if you see the waste water that was available for the kitchen garden were utilized and effectively utilized to promote kitchen garden all the year round. So there were higher household dietary diversity, and the kitchen produce plants were used in preparation of complementary feeding for their children. In Tamil Nadu, another study conducted on 20 villages in a specific district, Dharmapura district, where around 400 women were trained on establishing low-cost kitchen gardens using eco-friendly methods. And as you can see, the impact, all of them were able to create these gardens. Good harvests were possible. They were relying less on the market purchased food, and they were using the kitchen wastewater for kitchen gardens. Another one from Maharashtra, again in Thane district, they distributed Nutri kits to parents of malnourished children and provision of vitamins, and then interactive sessions with the community on integration of local foods, recipes, and training on mushroom processing. So that was a very specific intervention. And what they found were that people were growing more of nutritious plants and were cultivating nutri crops, and they could see a decrease in the level of malnourishment in the community. So the Nutri-Garden initiatives at the state and national level. So these are some of my last slides. Under Odisha Livelihood Mission, about 90,000 Nutri-Gardens have been set up in the state. And in Odisha, if you all know, women's health, self-help groups are very active under different programs. Now, in 2020, Uttar Pradesh also created a policy initiative, Uttam Poshan, Uttar Pradesh Rationale, and where they want to establish Nutri Gardens in all villages. Karnataka Horticulture Department, the Tamil Nadu Horticulture Department, some of them have tied up with the livelihood missions like the MNREGA, and also the school education department to create school gardens. And in Tamil Nadu, they have actually gone ahead and created roof gardens in school to create nutrition awareness. And as you can see in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, Kishi Vigyan Kendra, as I've mentioned already, have actually created Nutri-Smart villages in several, and could establish around 1,737 Nutri Gardens. And I must mention here that with IARI and even the Lady Evans College students have actually collaborated with the IARI faculty in creating this Nutri-Smart villages and the concept of Nutri-Smart Gardens, and a lot of BCC has gone into it. So our nutrition students can really collaborate with the agricultural universities in creating these interventions at the grassroots level. The School Nutrition Garden, a new initiative in 2019 by the Ministry of Human Resource Development, has directed all schools in rural and urban areas to create school nutrition gardens with the objective of addressing malnutrition and micronutrient deficiency, to give children first-hand experience in nature and gardening, and to enhance the knowledge of children regarding nutritional aspects of vegetables and harmful effects of junk food, ultra-processed food, or the fast foods. The schools with limited lands are encouraged to practice gardening using containers, pots, damaged bowls, etc. Technical assistance, training, provision of seeds, saplings, and organic manure are promoted. All activities are undertaken under the Eco Club, and a huge range of vegetables, fruits, roots and tubers, and and medicinal herbs are to be encouraged under the school nutrition program. So, in the conclusion, I would say nutrition gardens are an indigenous and sustainable solution to malnutrition and hunger, provided they are supported by effective behavior change strategies, helping the community to empower themselves and take decisions on their own behalf to use this particular intervention at their backyard for their own nutritional well-being. It can also play a critical role in ensuring nutrition security and diversity at school level, household level, Anganwadi center level, that can further improve nutritional well-being of the growing children. And this particular intervention has the potential to empower rural women in making decisions related to garden produce, its sale, and incorporation in the habitual dietary intake. Hence, nutrition gardens can be a micro solution and an affordable way of ensuring food security and balanced nutrition in vulnerable communities like the tribal communities of India. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jairat, for an excellent presentation. And now I would ask Dr. Deepti Sharma to please ask the questions that have been raised by participants. Over to you, Dr. Deepti.
Good evening, everyone. There are a few questions which are being asked by our students. Number one, Moksha has asked, did these tribal people eat cooked food, or do they eat just the raw food?
No, they do eat, well, it's a fruit, they will eat it raw. But yeah, mostly the way we cook it. So, you know, the perception about the tribals, they are also undergoing a lot of nutrition transition. But their method of preparation is very unique, very different. So, for example, I'll give you an example, and they are very healthy. You know, we overcook sometimes foods, but the method of using, suppose, the green leafy vegetables, they will just stir fry it with a little bit of garlic, a little bit of salt, and that's it, not too many spices. So stir frying with mustard oil, and which usually leads to minimal loss of the heat labile micronutrients. So they're cooking it till the right stage. Yes, that knowledge is also there, and we have something to learn from there. And during my recent visit, I could see a recipe which is unique, you know, between the two sal leaves, they will put lots of fish, small water fish. Now it was a rainy season. They would marinate it with salt and haldi and put it between the two leaves and burn it on charcoal fire. Or they will just burn the leaves and let the fish cook between it. Now, as we all know, fish doesn't need overcooking. It gets cooked very easily, and it uses minimal oil. So you understand, they have their indigenous ways of cooking. Now, they also have ways of preserving their food. So several of the leafy vegetables which are not available during the lean period, they would just sun dry it and keep it. And then they will make a stew with rice water and the leafy vegetable. So there are several recipes which are there, and certain foods which are to be eaten raw, they will eat it raw, but they do have methods of cooking. And I got your point also regarding the cooking losses. Yes, there is cooking loss happening when some of the indigenous varieties of foods are cooked. But having said that, they have such high levels of micronutrients. I think despite the cooking losses, I would say still a lot of the nutrient is retained by using the better methods of cooking. So this is how it is. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, Ritu has asked whether the tribal communities use pesticides.
Well, very good question. And when we are talking about sustainable food systems, it was really, I was really elated to see that some of the communities are still continuing with their organic methods of cultivation. Some of them are still going ahead with the indigenous seeds, and they are using cow dung manure, which is the organic manure for their crop production. On the contrary, they also told us that sometimes they are being asked to, use the hybrid varieties of seed, and for those seeds, sometimes they are using the chemical fertilizer. And according to them, they already have a taste preference for the indigenous seeds, though there could be issues around the production, the productivity, the yield of these seeds. But I think more research is needed to utilize these indigenous varieties of seeds using the organic methods of farming, yet promoting their yield. I think that is where we nutritionists have to work with the agriculturalists in promoting solutions that are sustainable, and learning from the traditional communities how they grow their food, yet superimpose it with technology that will lead to better irrigation facilities, better plowing methods, and other things. Okay.
Ma'am, there's one last question put by Jagriti. Can you tell the difference between Nutri Garden and the kitchen garden that we have?
Yeah, so Nutri Garden is the kind of kitchen garden only. What we are trying to do is create a balance of all macro and micronutrients through proper planning of the kitchen garden, so that all the year round you get all the micronutrients from the produce from the same garden. And this is possible. So if you look at the Nutri Garden concepts that are available, where you can actually have a look, where you can actually select. There are creepers where you can grow the lentils. There are shrubs, there are herbs, there are certain other things, and you will get a complete package of food items. And there are several interventions in Chhattisgarh and all, where they have shown that all the year round you get to grow foods which will provide you with the complete package for all the micronutrients that are essential. So the Nutri Garden is an extension of the kitchen garden, wherein we make sure that what we grow is able to meet the recommended dietary allowances or the estimated average requirements of the population that we are talking about, or a particular household of 5, for example. Okay?
Ma'am, Urvika has just now put one message. Do the tribal people also eat junk food like we eat? Like Maggi, kurkures?
Very relevant question, and I'm a little upset about it. But yes, nutrition transition has stepped into these cultures also. And as I said, if I asked, what did you give the baby in the morning? And these ultra-processed foods have become a part of their dietary habits, and especially for children. They say, we have given him 2 biscuits in the morning and a bread in the evening, and that's it, and mother's milk. So where is the khichdi? Where is the rice gruel with green leafy vegetables? Oh, that is for the adults. My little kid eats biscuits. So you will be amazed to see the kind of packages we have collected from the remote villages, where the corner shop has several of these varieties at affordable prices. So nutrition transition is very much seeped into these tribal communities also. They have access to all those packaged, colorful products at affordable prices. So my only submission is that if they can do it, why can't we inculcate good dietary habits and practices using the same principle of colorful messaging and making our Anganwadi foods as popular as those foods which are there in the corner shop? Okay, yeah, it is very much there.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Deepti. And now it's time to thank our speaker, Dr. Suparna Ghosh, who has so wonderfully explained the complex issues. Like we thought maybe tribals have different problems, but it is not like this. They also have the same problems, and the solutions have to be there. And I think the role of social marketing as you said, is also there. We have to market our nutrition. Of course, kitchen gardens and things are there, but unless and until we market them and give the message that these foods are important to them and not the biscuits or the junk food, maybe that nutrition transition will not take place. So I really thank you, ma'am, for sparing time from your very busy schedule, and also thank Dr. Pulkit Mathur, and also thank Dr. Bani and other members of the NSI executive team. Thank you so much. Today was a very busy day. There was a webinar in the lunchtime at Lakshmi Bai College, and there was a webinar in our college itself. Some of the timings clashed, and so and we kept it at our evening, so that was a disadvantage. But still, I am happy that you could all join. And then I would like to thank our principal and also my entire team, Mrs. Mamta Marwa, Dr. Deepthi, and of course my students who are always there for us. And I again request the participants to please fill up the feedback form. And I hope we get to do more work with NSI in future also. And thank you so much, Dr. Suparna Ghosh, ma'am. And I hope we keep in touch in future also, and we do more such activities. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Suparna. Thank you for coming for this event.
I wanted to personally thank NSI also, because I should have said it at the beginning, but thank you, NSI and Shyama Prasad College to Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College for organizing this. It's always a pleasure interacting with you. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure listening to you, Suparna, as well.
Yeah,
thank you, Bani. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Dear all, please turn on your video for a picture. Dear all students, please turn on your video. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Dheeraj.
Bye-bye. Very nice. Bye, bye, Minu.
Bye. Bye.
हेलो मीनू मैम
हाँ जी सर.
लाइव स्ट्रीम क्लोज कर दें
हाँ हाँ सर, प्लीज क्लोज.